Hey guys, what's up? This is Pantar Dragon, and today we're doing the patch 5.14 rundown of the changes. I want to be going over the big things and not minor bug fixes. And so the big things are usually buffs and nerfs, of course, to a champion. So why don't we go ahead and let's get started. Okay, so first up, we're going to be doing some Gangplank thoughts about the champion. First up, he's probably going to be a top lane more than a jungler, of course. He needs to farm a lot with his Q, and his barrels don't really help in the jungle too much, as the barrels only do bonus damage to champions. Also, I think the only build that you can really build on him and be like really good with it is going to be the Triforce Infinity Edge. Like, I guess you can go tank after your Triforce, but the more AD you have, the more damage you'll do on your passive and your barrels. Also, you can't max out W anymore first or second because you know how they nerfed the base healing of it. So now you can't just heal like 350 hit point in lane whenever you want. Also, since he doesn't have his Grog Soaked Blade passive anymore, and like the free AD coming from his old E, there's no reason to build Static Shiv since you don't scale with attack speed anymore. And final conclusion about this new Gangplank, I feel like it's a nerf unless someone shows me the way where they can use his barrels to full efficiency. Like, this is the one skill that takes some brains since it acts like dominoes. As in the laning phase, I feel like it's a bit hard to use the barrels against ranged enemies, but against melee champions, you can definitely provide a lot of zoning, although the trade-off is you're going to push the wave. And if you can effectively use the barrels in team fights, then he's going to be really strong, as the barrels do a lot of damage to enemies since it does penetrate 60% of their armor. And if you can land that barrel damage in team fights, he's going to be really strong. Next up is going to be Miss Fortune, and she's actually receiving some buffs this patch. So her Q now does 150% damage if the first shot kills an enemy unit. Also, the bounce logic is going to be more predictable, since now it's going to bounce off to the nearest enemy that is behind the enemy you shot with Q. And now the angle is reduced to 60 degrees, so that's good. What I can say about this buff is that it does present a lot of zoning potential in the lane, since the Q bounce off does hurt a lot, and so enemies will avoid being behind minions which are about to die. And this is just a laning phase buff, of course, not really a team fight. And next up is going to be the W, no longer applying grievous wounds, but activating Strut's movement speed bonus. I feel like you can look at it as a nerf and a buff in some certain situations, because like grievous wounds is strong in certain situations, but the 70 bonus movement speed coming from Strut on activation could be useful from escaping from the enemy. Although I can't really see it being too useful in team fights because you usually activate it when you're auto attacking for the attack speed buff, and when you're farming, you probably already have your passive movement speed up. Maybe after the jungle camp you can activate your W for the movement speed buff, but if you're escaping from the enemy and they're still attacking you, then they'll just pop down your strut again. And next up, they're buffing the early ranks of her E, so more slow in the beginning. Good for laning phase, of course, and catching people out. But it is 5% less at max rank, but who cares, it's only 5%. Also, FYI, people are maxing out E second. How do I know this? Because I was playing Miss Fortune in Season 4 and ranked. And final opinion about her in this current meta, and if she's going to be viable or not. Well, honestly, right now, I do think she's viable, especially in solo queue. Like, I'd play her, why not? I don't think she's bad. She has some weird-ass scalings with their AP and AD. But with the buff to her Q and E, I feel like people are going to pick her up more. And maybe it's going to be like Twitch, where he gets a champion visual update, and all of a sudden he's being played in LCS. But yeah, right now, she's not that bad. She's, like, decent to me. Next up, we'll be talking about Azir. So no more attack speed from cooldown reduction. Now when you put points into W, you get attack speed. But think of it this way. At level 1, you're going to have 20% attack speed coming from your W. And this is worth about 16% CDR of your old passive. And it's actually funny because 60% attack speed is actually more than 40% CDR. Because 40% CDR actually gives you only 50% attack speed. So I guess it helps a bit in the late game. And I think people are just going to focus a lot more on building ability power instead of like trying to cap out on cooldown reduction. So it's an early game buff from levels 1 to 6 until he gets like, you know, a Stinger or Morello's Nomicon. And the late game buff when he gets 5 points into his W, but it is a mid game nerf since he won't have as much as attack speed as he did before. And also, the E no longer knocking up the first champion hit. And so I think what people were doing was they would WEQ into you and get one auto attack and then like use their ultimate to CC you and then barrage you with auto attacks, and then, you know, it's just a really strong all-in for Azir. So now his all-in potential is weaker than it was before. And now this is where I feel like his win rate in solo queue is just gonna plummet. I don't think the passive and W change was that bad, to be honest. But this, I just feel like he's only going to be played in the competitive scene. No more reason to play him in solo queue when there's like so many better champs. Next up is going to be Echo, and it looks like right here they're just trying to emphasize his early game a bit more and giving him some buffs. So the tank Echo jungle was nerfed because they're like passing the base damage on his passive and his base attack speed, so I feel like he's more of an AP solo laner. But even then, I don't feel like he's that great right now. I feel like there's better champions than him. Like with all those nerfs on that one patch, there just needs to be more compensation. Haha, next up is going to be Elise, my Season 3 bitch, and you know, I always get my hopes up whenever she gets buffed, and this might be the one where it actually matters. With the stun duration being 1.6 at level 1, this means you can start maxing out your W second now. And now that your spiderlings do magic damage instead of physical damage, magic penetration is going to hurt a lot more on Elise. So what do I think about Elise after all these, buffs? Well, I think I'm going to use her like, this is Season 3 all over again. Finally, we get the stun duration back. We don't have to go with the utility build and, be a cocoon bot. And now the MPen build, especially in solo queue, is going to make Elise into carry Elise. So yeah, I have high hopes for this patch for Elise, and hopefully I'm not disappointed. But I don't think I will be. Next up, we're going to be talking about Evelyn. So base damage on her Q is going down, and the slow is going up on her ultimate. This sucks really hard. I don't think she's going to be good anymore. Think about it. Say you're level 9 and you're going to gank somebody. In one gank, how much hate spikes do you throw at somebody? Probably like 5 or 6, so you're losing about 120 damage. So goodbye Evelyn, you're not viable anymore. But that slow compensation, ooh, that's really good. That's just what I needed to compensate for my Q nerfs. Next up, Ryze is getting a nerf. So stacking duration is being reduced to 6 seconds, which means in the laning phase there's less zoning potential from the Ryze since there's a potential to all-in enemy when he has 4 stacks, even like 3 or 2. So it's a nerf to his laning phase, and now they're just straight up nerfing his damage on his Q and E. Well, they did nerf the W damage in the last patch, but they compensated that for giving him some buffs to his Q, and now they're taking that away. It's even worse than it was before. So basically what happens is they nerfed his W, they nerfed his Q, and they nerfed his E, and now we're even worse than rework Ryze on release. Also, since his Q is his main damage source, definitely his damage in teamfights won't be as big as it was before. So yeah, it's just a big nerf to him, and I don't think you'll see a lot of him anymore. Next up is going to be Tahm Kench, and he's getting a buff to his Q and R. This is actually what the damage was before when I played him on the PBE. So as you can see, his laning phase damage is going up with his Q, and he's getting more damage in the mid game and late game from his ultimate. And also he can use his ultimate a bit more with the cooldown less. What does this mean for Tahm Kench? Well, he's still probably going to be bad, but maybe not in the top lane, as we have Darian playing him in the top lane and trying to discover him and, seeing what he can do. Obviously as a support, I feel like he's pretty bad. No laning presence basically, and maybe in the top lane he'll have a better time. Next up, Vayne is getting a buff in this patch. So as you can see here, the cooldown of Vayne's Tumble now begins when you're launching an attack instead of when it arrives. This means compared to it now, depending on your attack speed, your Q's cooldown will be like 0.4 to 0.1 seconds less. And her Tumble's cooldown at max rank is 2 seconds, so yeah, I think it's actually a pretty big buff. She can kite more and use her Tumble more. Although since she does build like Blade of Rune King into Phantom Dancer, in the mid game it'll probably be like 0.1 or 0.2 seconds less. And now I gotta try playing 40% CDR Vayne and see how it is with this buff. Next up we're going to be talking about Yasuo, and right here his third Q is now going to apply on hit effects. This means he can apply red buff, apply static shiv, and of course lifesteal. A little minor buff, but it helps. I thought it would be bigger, but I guess it's not really. Next up is going to be the Hunter's Machete, and they're just increasing the mana per second by 1. So best way to think about it is they're increasing the mana regen by 33%. Which is good because sometimes you do find yourself low in mana in the jungle, and like I've been in situations where many times I had no mana but a bunch of health, so this helps that situation. Next up is going to be Runeglaive, and now honestly this is just a big nerf to AP Ezreal. Something like Runeglaive Diana may still use it in the mid lane, but for on-hit effects like Ezreal's Q, Sorc Shoes and MPen coming from his red marks won't be as effective as it was before, since his Q scales off his base AD and of course has base damage. So this change actually hurts AP Ezreal a lot, and I don't think you'll be seeing him a lot anymore. And as you can see here, the AoE damage only applies on monsters, and now it deals double damage to the first monster hit for some reason. Okay, so Nidalee gets a buff, and they didn't nerf Nidalee in this patch, so she's even much more stronger. Everyone who uses Runeglaive can now clear camps faster a bit, so it's pretty interesting to see this change, and yeah, Nidalee will probably still be number 1. Next up is going to be the Dragon and Baron timers are now going to be updated instantly for both teams even if they don't see it. And I bet some of you guys are thinking, wow, Riot, way to make this game way easier. Well, no, not really. It just helps me be more lazy because I don't have to concentrate when the enemy finish the Baron or Dragon and make a timer based off when you hear the global Dragon sound or when you see the enemy has a Baron buff. It's just tedious to do that. And like for the team who's not timing Dragons and Barons when they don't see it, they're at a massive disadvantage because if they don't actually time that Dragon or Baron, well, the enemy can show up and take it for free since they know when it spawns, and that gives them a free objective. Competitive, it doesn't really change because they already changed the timers, but for solo queue, you'll see a lot more contesting around the Dragons and Barons. Next up, we're going to be talking about the new item ZEKE's HARBINGER, which will be replacing the ZEKE's Herald. I won't be reading out the stats to you. You can, look at it for yourself right here. But basically, me and Gaming Curios were actually testing this item on the PvE server. We were looking at the stats also and concluded that it was gold efficient. But of course, we want to be talking about the unique passive, which gives 20% more AP and 50% critical strike for 6 seconds. So I don't think I'd ever rebind this to an AP champion. It'd always be on my AD carry. And my first opinions of this item is that it can be really overpowered if you actually do get the passive activated in a team fight. And it's not hard for you and your ally to get 100 stacks, since you get stacks by just being together, attacking an enemy, or using spells. Your support gets 10 stacks for every spell she uses, so what your support will do is right before a teamfight starts, she'll use all of her spells, and then you'll have 50% crit chance right before the teamfight starts. Is it broken? Is it going to be used in like competitive play? Probably. You have a 100% crit chance if you have a Phantom Dancer and an Infinity Edge. The stats on it aren't that bad, so even without the passive, it's still good. And who's it going to be built on? Well, it's probably going to be your range supports who scale with AP. Maybe not for tanks, but say your AD carry is really ahead and you want to buff them somehow, then all you would do is get this item and yeah, your AD carry will be really strong. Also, I'd only get this on Alistair just because his ultimate gives him a lot of AD, so he can make use of the 50% crit chance too, and be like a support bruiser who fucks people up in his ultimate. But yeah, I think it's a really strong item. I'm going to say it's actually a meta item. Like, especially if your AD carry is ahead, then I'll definitely buy it. The only problem is you do lose the stacks if your partner is not in range. So if your support gets bursted down right before the teamfight starts, well, you won't have the 50% crit chance for 6 seconds. And yeah, it just seems really strong, but I don't think I'd buy it if my AD carry is behind. I'd much rather buy like a Solari or Mikhail's instead. But I'll probably buy it most times when my AD carry is ahead or going even. Oh, and not Callista, because she doesn't scale with crit. Anyways, thanks guys for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time. Dude, is that was it on? That was the ZEKE's proc. Holy shit, holy shit.